Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Shir. It's Thursday. Your Parshas was Chana Nachamu. I'd like to dedicate this Shir to my father's 100th Yom Holedes. He was born 1925. He was born Yud Beis Menachem of Tofresh Pei, so it's now exactly 100 years this week. Just one little incident I'd want to share. Very little incident, but he was, I think, the first time he went to the Rebbe, or the second time, and the Rebbe commented to my uncle, to David Raskin. He says, by the Bruder der Schlappe zugleich. He used to wear, like many from Yidden, wear bent up hat, like a Homburg kind of style. And the Rebbe commented, it's too straight. So there and then, some people gave it some therapy to bend it down. I'm sure there's a deeper significance to that story, but let's come into our series of shilas for this week. And so the first thing is that two people separately contacted me about inyonim of honey added to ketores. The Hashgacha Pratis in Rambam Gimel Prochim L'Yoim. This was the Rambam beginning of the Shir of Yud Aleph Menachem Of. So the two comments. The first one is, you read here at the end of the long paragraph, Tana Rabbana Pita Bakteris Ketzat, and also in the shorter version, which we have after in Kelikenu, Pita Bakteris Hatzri Vatziperen. So we have then, in addition to the 11 ingredients of the Ketores, there's a number of additional ingredients. So there's Mala Oshon and there's Yen Kafrisin. And then Rav Nosson Habavli adds, in Nosson, but Af Kippas Hayardin Kol Shehi. If some Kippas Hayardin was added, that should be added. Okay. And then in the same breath, Af Kippas Hayardin Kol Shehi, V'Nosson Bodvash Psola. But if you put in honey, it's disqualified. This is what you have on the screen is from Sida Teira Eir. And the Telas Hashem says apparently there's a comma here. And you wonder what exactly is Reb Nosson saying here? What's the connection between Kippas Hayardin, whatever that is? And what's that got to do with adding honey? What's the flow here? And what's actually remarkable is, which I didn't notice it when I was working on the Siddur, that you see here the first edition of the Alter Rebbe Siddur. We spoke about various added ingredients, yeah. So we spoke about, as I said, Mala Oshon and Yen Kafrisen, and Reb Nosson Bavli adds Kippus Hayardin. End of statement. Then the original Tana takes back the microphone and he starts saying, "V'im Nosson Bodvash Psola." This is not even nothing to do with the Reb Nosson Bavli. It's a separate statement. And there's no inner connection between the recommendation of having Kippus Hayardin and the objection to having Bodvash. It's two separate inyonim. So the punctuation makes all the difference. Okay. The second comment was, someone asked me about the pshat in this Baraisa. You say every day, twice a day. Tanya, second, Tanya Bakapora, Tanya Bakapora. If you would add a kurtev, a tiny amount of dvash, into the ketores, and why don't we do it? Because the Torah says it's like a rather long-winded. Start saying, this would be a consequence, and why don't you do it? Because the Torah says. Say it's not allowed. It says in the Torah, no, it's not allowed. What's the whole conversation here? So in the Siddur, I have here a quote of the letter of the Rebbe. You're asking about the Maimer Azal. The whole the conversation back and forth. Could have said Bekitzer, Aim Orvin Badvash. This is the Locha, no dash, because it says in the Torah, Chol. So the answer will be found in Teras Koyanim, which is quoted in the Tosfos increases. So here you have on the screen Tosfos increases. The Teras Koyanim. Dvash, it says that you shouldn't put in dvash. I only know from this, perhaps where the ingredient of honey will be detrimental to the quality. I mean, now what about Ktoires, where the patomim, the experts, the connoisseurs of Ktoires say that dvash is actually good for it, as it says in the Yerushalmi, if you put a little bit of honey, lo yehoya kol ha'olam yachel lame mifnei berecha. What is it? What is it? So this is almost the same as bar kapara. Ein odom yochel lame mifnei recha means not does not mean unbearable. In English, we say I can't stand it means it's unbearable, but that's not the pshat of the Braise. It means it would be so enthralling, so overwhelming, it'd be so powerful that you would not be able to hold yourself back. You'd be so drawn to it. So ein odem yochelam you wouldn't be able to restrain yourself. It's such a powerful thing. If the Ketores is a fragrance, it was a very beautiful fragrance, very powerful fragrance. It says elsewhere that someone says my father had goats many miles away, and they would sneeze because of the smell of the Ketores. So the Ketores having a powerful smell is actually a quality. It's a mile. And therefore, this is the question. Mainly, if it would be an ingredient which would spoil the quality, I understand. Sarah says don't put it in. But you might have thought if it's an ingredient which is going to actually boost the ketores, after that which should be allowed. Talmud loima kol davash, not just davash, kol davash. Don't differentiate whether it is a ingredient which spoils or enhances. That's the pshat of the whole conversation. By the way, the Rambam does not bring this drush. I didn't notice. He brings a different drush on Chol Dvash to say that even kolshu, there's no limit to how small the amount of honey added to the Ketores to disqualify even the tiniest amount of honey also. And he learns that v'chol Dvash. In other words, say even the tiniest amount, like kolshu. Meanwhile, then, if that's the case, I'm intrigued. What then is the objection of the Torah to be using adding honey to Ketores? You see, we've got other ingredients added. They've got 11 ingredients, but also yen kafrisin and malaoshon and kipas hayardin. So all of those enhance it somehow. So what's the extreme objection to dvash? So I looked up the chinuch. That's his mandate to give reasons for the mitzvahs. And he actually didn't quote it on the screen. He just says this one's quite a difficult one. What's the logic here? Meanwhile, he says that there is isur of so'ir dvash, because so'ir we know is yeast, and that causes things to swell. And honey apparently adds to it foaming, to froth. And that's the objection, because it's like the Torah rejecting things of gaiva, of pride. So that's one pshat, that the so'er and dvash are both components which would cause swelling and therefore opinion of yeshus and gaiva. Then he quotes the Ramban, who says the karbonis which are the rotzen Hashem anichbod, they should not come from things ashelahem hayad hachazoko l'shanis hativim. They are. I'm guessing this is what he's saying. You sometimes have substances which are going to be, I don't know if the word mind altering is the right word, but let's say people who have a significant amount of alcohol, which causes a person to behave in a different way, take certain drugs, there can be certain things which will make the person in a different mood. So the Torah is being so powerful that ein odem yochelam it'd be so overwhelming. The Torah doesn't want us to serve Hashem with media which are going to change our nature. We have to serve Hashem with our nature, not with media which overpower our nature. That's the way the Ramban is saying. So there is a contemporary discussion now that cannabis has become legal in certain parts of the Western society. What is the Torah attitude to taking such substances? And here you got here a mocker that Torah doesn't want us to, Hashem doesn't want us to serve him in where we've lost control of ourselves. He wants us to serve him with our das, with our seichel. Okay, so those are 2 points on the Inyan of Tavash, as I said, a connection with the Rambam. Now, here I got this question this week. As you can see on the screen, this is a mezuzah case, and the way it works is you screw a track into the wall. Here it's on the masonry, it can be on the wood, doesn't matter. And then the mezuzah case has got built in a kind of, and it's going to fit onto the track. And then you slide it down and it fits snugly and it looks beautiful and no nails are visible. And the question is that called kvias mezuzah? Is that adequate for the kiyum and the mitzvah? Can you make a brocha for you putting up mezuzah in such a way? So this is earlier in the week. And meanwhile, I want to share with you another picture. You can see here, someone writes to me, "Hi, Rabbi Raskin, is it kosher if there's no screw on the bottom?" So Bashkocha Protes, I've just been looking at this topic here. Now, there is a Gemara which says in Menachos, "Telo b'makel pesula." If you just hung the mezuzah in a stick, on a stick, that's not okay because it says bishorecha ba'inon. It has to be connected to the shorech, has to be connected to your gate. So the Rambam says this, it brings down this Gemara. Talo b'makil psula she'ein zoi kavua. It's lacking in being affixed. And so I'd like to just add that the fact that the brocha is likboya mezuzah, when the Chachamim coined the matbeya habrocha that shows the word likboya, that tells us that the mezuzah has to be fixed. As we find in the brocha his atif v'tzitzis, that the Goini made a whole fuss about the fact that his atif has to be in a way of iatifo. So when Chachamim say the brocha likboya, it has to be kavua. Now we see the Rambam says so. The Bach, we see in the Sefer is quoted, the Bach is bringing proofs that it's not essential that it is kavua, that has to be fixed with nails. It's only mitzvah and mamucha. Let's move on. This is all from the Sefer Seichel Tov, and it has here from the Sefer Das Kedoshim from the Bechorcherov. If you have a mezuzah case, which has got also a lower track, which has got the metal is bent in such a way, and then the mezuzah itself fits into the bent over lip of the track. So then he says, make sure that the bottom of the track is bent over so that the mezuzah should not be able to be slipped out downwards, only upwards. So reading this, it seems that the track which we have just described, which I've seen the picture of, is not identical, but very similar to what the Das Kedoshim is saying, that so long as it doesn't fall, then it won't be able to slip down, that he considers that kavua. He further brings a discussion about a mezuzah fixture. Imagine you have two rings. The lower ring has got a shulaim, has got a base, and the upper ring is just an open ring. And you put the mezuzah into the two rings, and let's say you have your mezuzah is like a tube, and the lower part is held by this ring, which has got a shulaim, has got a base, and the upper one holds it in place. But really, you could just lift it out. So it's a mezuzah in a fixture. The mezuzah is safe; it's not going to fall, but it's no melochen. It's not fixed. Yeah, you can, if you pick it out on Shabbos, there wouldn't be any melocha. And even there is noita to say that would be okay. Possibly, yeah, there's room to be makel even there. But coming back to so looking at this shiloh of the mezuzah fixed with one screw, what I answered the fellow is, so long as it's firm, even with one screw, it's also enough. And the same thing could be said over here with this sliding track. Since it stays firm, once it's slid onto its place, it is firm, then I think it is okay. That's my impression from it's still, it would be considered kavua. There's a need for kvias, and so it's like an interesting point. It may be a possibility to slip it off on Shabbos. So as far as Hilchos Shabbos is concerned, it may not be considered part of the building, and yet in Hilchos Mezuzah it would be counted as fixed. I'm not sure. Maybe that has to be a little bit more. So the poil that this in this story with this sliding case, it was a mezuzah for a building which um, was not a dwelling at all. Not even I asked the don't know. It's not even a place where people would eat, not sleep, not eat. It was like more like a. So I said just to put it up without a bracha, but I'm more noted to say that it is valid. Right, let's move on. So someone asked me a question. What bracha is said on coconut milk? So the reason why we make a shahakal on orange juice and not a beir priha eitz, even though oranges we know come from trees, is because in Torah, in halacha perspective, taking a good geschmacka juicy orange and make it into juice is a downgrade. You've degraded it. The only fruit which make it into juice as an upgrade is grapes and olives. There it's an upgrade, but other fruit to make them into juice is considered a downgrade, and therefore it becomes shahakal. The case of the coconut milk is different because it's not squeezed out, and therefore it's why is it different to the fruit itself, which is priho. And this is from Reb Chaim Noah, and he brings also from a Charles Schwab's Guinness Vradim, who talks about the liquid found inside a melon. In Mitzrayim, apparently, they would have water inside the melons. So he says it's by priadoma. Having said all that, he brings arguments to the contrary, and his bottom line is that since there's a suffix, there are those who say it would be shahakol, so then roy levorech al meha egoisim shahakol niya they should make a shahakal. So the bottom line remains with coconut juice, coconut milk, the bracha is shahakal, although there's a strong svara to say that it is ha'etz, and if you just did make ha'etz, let's say, on some coconut or something else, and you're going to have that, I would say don't say a separate bracha, shahakal on the coconut milk, because it may be already included in the way you just said. But if you're asking what to do lachatchila, so I mean, not having any other fruit, just the coconut juice, so the answer would be to say shahakal because of suffix brachas. Right, let's move on. So here I had a question in some Beis Chabad. I believe it was in Eretz Yisrael. Not that it makes any difference for our discussion. So on Friday evening, 10 minutes after sunset, someone comes into the Beis Chabad and he says, "Can I put on tefillin? Can you help me put on tefillin?" So Baruch Hashem, people are coming to ask to put on tefillin, but now it's already 10 minutes into Shabbos. So in the volume 2 of Sefer Nesivim Misneh Shlichus, I have a discussion about someone who would go to shiva houses, and he would, in England, it's quite common that in the summer they would have a minyan for Ma'ariv, and people would come and to the shiva. Lav Davka, they put on tefillin. So this Lubavitcher Shliach would go to the houses to put on, and he would ask people to put on tefillin. And then some people are asking, how can you put on tefillin if they've davened Ma'ariv already? They have davened or they haven't davened, I question, but let's say if they have davened Ma'ariv, so here there becomes an issue of Trei Koli Desasri. There is an objection not to do two contradictory things. So if someone's already davened Ma'ariv, then he realizes I didn't put on tefillin today, or I didn't bench lulav today, or I didn't hear shofar today, or I didn't, yeah, etc. So then he's already davened Ma'ariv, but it's still light outside, it's before sunset. So then he should do those mitzvahs without a bracha. That's a machlokas harishonim, and this is how it works out in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Lamed. He talks about this, and the Payal he says You should put it on without a bracha. In other words, you've made it through your davening ma'ariv, you've made it laila. That's subjective, but in real terms, it's still yom. So that's the solution there. That's the answer there. But here it's more, and the question could be also, let's say if you're Makabel Shabbos and then you realize you haven't davened ma'ariv or etc. Can be also with Sfira. If it's you daven Ma'ariv early and then you realize, oops, I didn't count Sfira last night. Can you still count Sfira after you daven Ma'ariv and then down an hour later count Sfira for the following night, yeah, for that night. So, but you can rely that since it's still daylight, you can do the mitzvah of the day. But here's worse. Here's already Shabbos, and here we have from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch on the screen. Ein levorach shum bracha k'shcheres tefillin. I feel that you don't make a bracha when you remove the tefillin, although Shalmi says you do, but the halach is we don't. Even if you're taking them off erev Shabbos ben hashmoshes, she'oz chayiv hu l'cholson. There's a chiyuv to remove your tefillin when Shabbos comes in, because Shabbos Yom Tov allows them on tefillin, so you're not allowed to wear tefillin on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Very interesting. We're learning the Gemara at the end of Perek Aleph of Be'er. Talks about if a person is stuck out in the field and there's safety, etc. But otherwise, there's a chiyuv to take off the tefillin when Shabbos comes in. And therefore, when someone comes in and says it's 10 minutes into Shabbos, it's 10 minutes after Shkia, to say that he wants to put on tefillin, the answer should be, I'm sorry, it's already Shabbos, and we can't put on tefillin on Shabbos. And the fact that there's Rabbein Tamzman and all that kind of stuff, I still don't think that with Poel we follow. This is how we make Shema Shabbos. I have just one other message here, that what would happen if you do put on a tefillin, you got your people in your Beis Chabad, and you've told them you've made Kiddush is ready Shabbos, and then they see you putting on tefillin with this fellow. It somehow sends a confusing message. It seems is that you know what that Kabbalah Shabbos is negotiable. When it's really important, they can still do stuff. So I think it's also on a educational level, it's misleading. But right. I wanted just to share with you. I have a nephew of mine. He was in Eretz Yisrael for Yom Tov, and he asked me about going to the Kosel Maravi on the second day of Shavuos to do Mivsat Tefillin. So he was keeping 2 days Yom Tov, and he's asking, could he put on Tefillin with Yidden on the second day of Yom Tov? For him, it's Yom Tov. For them, it's a Yom Chol. So I said that he is allowed to. That you're allowed to move a thing which is a klishi malachta le'isur l'tzerich gufa mekoimo. So there's a yid who wants to put on tefillin. So you're allowed to be metal to tefillin, to put on the tefillin with the yid. Stammer is buksa for you, but if you l'tzerich atzme, but l'tzerich to do something useful with it, so you'd be allowed to. Right, let's move on. This one got me thinking. A fellow got onto a plane in New York at 2 p.m. on Monday and flew to Korea and arrived in Korea on a good few hours later. He did not see sunset, didn't become dark. Think if you're traveling west, yeah. So then the day goes on and on and on. So he was traveling west from New York towards Korea, towards Asia over the Pacific. It's just going on. It's a very long afternoon. Happens to be when he crossed the date line, it became from Monday afternoon, it became Tuesday afternoon. But it was just one very long afternoon. So he did not see dark. So he was confused, and he said he davened a second shacharis. I shared this with someone. He says, "How did he daven shacharis? It was just afternoon. There was no morning." He arrived apparently, according to this. If he left New York at 2 p.m., he arrived in Korea at 6 p.m. on Tuesday. And there's never mind, no night. There was not even a morning. But the point, this is the question. It can be in various variations. if you travel in such a way that you did not have a night, do you have to daven a second Shacharis? So the answer, my impression, is that no, you don't have to daven a second Shacharis. So we have here, if you missed a tefillah, then you can compensate by davening a second Shemoneh Esrei with the next tefillah. But here we have, this is in Siman Ayin Aleph, talking about an oinen Rahman al-Islam. If a person lost an immediate relative, so until the levaya, until the burial, they are get of oinen, which is exempt from all positive mitzvahs. Afterwards, after the burial is done, so then they become oval and the chayav mitzvahs. So he says that he does not daven a second Shemon Esrei. He missed Shachris because it was oinen in the morning. He doesn't daven twice mincha because there was no chiyuv for him to daven in the morning. So you don't have to make a tashlumin for when you had no duty in the first place. For that matter, he says also not to say birchas hashachar. Birchas hashachar are incumbent when you get up in the morning, you put on your shoes, you put on your clothes, etc. So it's got to do with a chiyuv incurred at the morning. If you had no chiyuv at the morning, there's no need. No, it's not allowed to say birchas hashachar after the kavura. And he says, finishes off in beirich mevorach brochel avatolahi. Now, with the exception though of birchas haTorah. Birchas haTorah is not like birchas hashachar. The last three brachas from Al Divrei Soiro, Barevno, and that one he should say because they are to be allowed to learn Torah. Oval is allowed to learn Torah, albeit it's restricted, but that's a different story. Birchas hashachar he shouldn't say. So coming back, similarly, he had no chiyuv of Ma'ariv, so he doesn't have to daven a second Shemon Esrei. Well, it's also now, having said all this, should be a consideration. Should we be traveling in such a way that you're missing out? You're missing out a mitzvah. You're missing out the mitzvah of Krishma Shel Arvis. And this route, I don't know whether there's an alternative flight route, but the person taking this route has lost out in the opportunity of doing mitzvahs Krishma Shel Arvis, and for that matter, mitzvah Shel Shachar also, because he didn't have. Okay. Let's move on. So someone asks me a totally different question. He has a rental agreement, and in the agreement it says if payment isn't made by a certain date, then there will be a fee charged. So he's asking, is that ribis? And the answer is basically it is ribis. And ribis, even if it doesn't come to fruition, merely including this in a document, in a contract, that if such and such happens, there will be a charge of ribis is also not okay. And that's really a struggle for lawyers, etc., for Hamish Yidden. Well, it's not for Hamish, for Jews. It doesn't matter Hamish or not Hamish, yeah, all Jews, to avoid when you generally many contracts will automatically include a charge of interest for delayed payment, and that's going to be a problem for a Jew to have such a document. And this I'm just to help show how this is in a contemporary sefer. If it works out, this is talking about rental. If you have if you're delayed, if you have an agreement that if you delay paying the rent, there will be a charge beyond the rent more. That would not be okay. So again, like asul kachas ribis avor ichur tashlum dmei. You wouldn't be allowed to charge interest if someone pays his rent late. Right. Fairly straightforward, but unfortunately, it's a very common thing, and perhaps people aren't so aware of it. I was at a shir a couple of years ago. I was in Eretz Yisrael, and they had a mumcha. Perhaps I told you this. There was an expert on Hilchos Ribis gave a shir there at this event, and in Eretz Yisrael it was every you have your electricity, your gas bill, your water supply, all of these things, all of these documents, all of these contracts have built in them that if you don't pay on time, you're going to be charged extra. So he was saying how in Eretz Yisrael, this is really a huge issue when you make any contract with companies, with suppliers and utilities to avoid the charges of ribis. How they work that out, how they solve it. In Chutzlar, it says these contracts are with Goyim, therefore it's not a problem. Okay, let's move on. Yeah. So here someone asks me, many purchases are now made with auto pay. What if my client is Jewish and the charge happens on Shabbos or Yom Tov? Is there any issue with that? So I receive a check and I put it in the bank. Let's say, but it's the time of the check is to be payable on Shabbos. So it means that the money is being transferred into my account from your account to my account on Shabbos. Is that okay? So he says if you didn't instruct it to be happen on that date, that's okay. So he says if I'm going to deposit a check on Friday, and the bank will process the check on Shabbos, he says that's okay, and it looks like also so long as it's so let's say how he's talk about a standing order to make a standing order to on a particular date, and that date can sometimes be of the month and sometimes be on Shabbos. So you're paying someone money from your account to their account, both Jews, but he says that's okay if that's not planned that way, it's just happening that way, then that's okay. Right, we have another couple of points here. We might finish a little early, allow me to get in time to show for Ma'ariv at 9:30. So a couple of feedbacks I want to share with you. Last week, if you remember, we had also a story about was it one last week or 2 weeks ago about saying Tachnun and saying Avinu Malkeinu when saying Avinu Malkeinu and Tachnun isn't said. And I told how by Tovshin Lamed Hey, the Rebbe had Yortzeit and Vov Tishrei, and I said there was a chosen there, and as a result, they didn't say Tachnun, and the Rebbe said also not to, the Rebbe didn't say Avinu Malkeinu. And then later explained how, according to Minig Sfard, which we follow, there's one tier. Not in Ashkenaz, there's two tiers of meeting Tachnun. In Ashkenaz Sfard, it's one tier. If you're not saying Tachnun, you don't say Avinu Malkeinu, Keil Chapayim, and Lam Natseach. Okay. So someone pointed out to me it wasn't a chosen, it was a balbris. And that's obvious. How often do you have a chosen in Aseret Semei Tshuva? It would be for a chosen to be a Vov Tishri to be a chosen would mean uh, unless he got married Mamash Aver Rosh Hashanah, which is not a popular date for chasnas. So yeah, he told me actually the name who it was, some of the family named Brill, and they had told him to stand near the Rebbe and to tell the Rebbe, and they were told the Rebbe that there's a Baal Simcha, there's a Baal Bris, and the Rebbe didn't say Tachnun and didn't say Avinu Malkeinu. Okay, so that's one feedback. Another feedback, we had a discussion, it came up about a mitzvah which is not a chiyuv. And I had a whole discussion, let's say if there's a kedusha, a sukkah has a kedusha, or if it's used for the mitzvah. Now, if a woman sits in the sukkah, which hasn't been used by a man, and she's not mechuyev, but does the mitzvah become a mitzvah even though there's no chiyuv to do it? That was the question. Does a voluntary mitzvah have the status of a mitzvah? That was a discussion last week. So Rabbi Lu shared with me, he has a kvias to go through the Rebbe's letters, and he had just come across this letter. Now this is to Rebbe Vremel Ziskind, who was I believe he was the Rosh Hashiva in 770 in his day, and a tremendous Lamdan. Rabbi Yankel Goldberg of Hadar Torah is a son-in-law of his. So he writes, so the Rebbe is writing to him about what's the value, what's the power, so to say, the hamshocha. If a child does a mitzvah, And the Rebbe had taken the view that a child's mitzvah, it's not the child is mimikayim a mitzvah in a Torah. And actually, the Alter Rebbe is quite clear in Siman Lamed Tes, although it's put in brackets, that the chiyuv is the mitzvah is the father's mitzvah. It's fulfilled by the child doing the mitzvah, this thing l'shem chinuch, but the chiyuv is the father. So that was one letter in Tafshin Yud Daled. Was it Tafshin Yud? I'm not sure exactly of the years, but there's two letters, one next to the other in Igros Kodesh, and talking about the hamshocha through a pool of a child who's potter, or the hamshocha through a mitzvah saseh, which has mangrama and done by Isha. And the Rebbe had taken the view it's like a mitzvah shehem reshus, not to say it has no effect at all, but it may be on a not the same level as a hamshocha done through a mitzvah, which there is a chiyuv. We have the psak halacha is gadol hamitzvah v'iseh, nishain mitzvah v'iseh. So the effect of a mitzvah v'iseh is greater. Okay, well that was point 10, and point 11, I want to share with you. We had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about the Arizal. Nusach Arizal has Hoidu before Baruch She'omar. And I showed you the whole thing, how the Zohar had the two Gesoyas, and how there's Hagoas Arizal to say that they're talking about Shabbos, about saying Anshe Knesset Zagdoila Tiknu to say Hashemayim Mesaprim, etc., and Rananut Tzadikim to say those on Shabbos. And Alter Rebbe says this is all the Anshe Knesset Zagdoila were metakin to say Hoidu before Baruch She'omar. Meanwhile, to refresh your memories, I had said something to the effect that Hoidu was instituted in connection with Korbanos, and therefore it's an interesting situation, because Hoidu is said following on from Korbanos, but by its very nature is like Psukei de Zimra, it's praises. So where does it belong? Does it belong with Korbanos, or does it belong with Psukei de Zimra? So Ashkenaz say it's Psukei Shevach. It goes with Psukei de Zimra, and Meshach Sfarad is saying it's got a connection with Korbanos. Now, when I gave this over to the Talmidim on last Sunday, not Sunday Tisha but the Sunday before, and I had on the screen from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, it was said by the Oren, and so I was now a bit confused. So let's go through this a little bit more carefully. You have in Divrei Hayomim, we have the whole story how the Oren had been captured by the Plishtim, and then the Plishtim returned it. They had suffered losses, etc. So they returned it, and then it was in a particular place. And then the story with Uziah, Peretz Uzzah, that it was carried on a wagon, and the Uzzah stretched out to stop it from falling, and then he died, and David HaMelech was very upset. Then they bring it to a place called the house or the premises of someone called Ovid Edom Hagiti, and it was there, and he had tremendous bracha. And subsequently, David HaMelech brings the Oren to Ir David. Now, Ir David, that's another name for Yerushalayim. So the Oren is brought to Yerushalayim. And this is in Divrei Hayomim. This is just before the Hoidul Hashem Kiru Vishmoi, which we say every day, is the whole story of how the Oren is brought to Yerushalayim, and David organizes Leviim, this one, and always says names of the celebration of it being brought to Yerushalayim, and then it goes into the Hoidul. And this is the background to what we have on the screen from Seder Olam. Seder Olam is like a historical record of going. It's a Braise. So it says here, they brought the Oren, Vaychal David, he brought Karbonis, and then he placed in front of the Oren Meshorsim, and then it says that in the morning they said Hoidul Hashem Kiru Vishmoi till Al Tigovim Shichoi, and in the afternoon they said Shiru Hashem Kol Haaretz. And that went on for the next 43 years. That there were these Mizmoidim said before the Oren, until finally Moshe Shlomo HaMelech had built the Beis HaMikdash and brought the Oren into the Beis HaMikdash, and so then this practice was stopped. So what threw me is was what was the Hoidu got to do with Korban Tomid, or was it got to do with the Yoren? Now look at the bottom of the screen. We have here this Orchis Chaim. It's quoted in the Bes Yosef in Siman Nun. Now the Orchis Chaim, be careful. There's two Rishonim who have a sefer called Orchis Chaim. There's Orchis Chaim, a brother of the Rosh, I believe, more like a Musa sefer, and then we got Orchis Chaim from Reb Aaron Mihayakoin Milunel. Lunel's in France. So what we have is from the second one, from the Orchis Chaim of Aaron Milunel, and it's kind of going through like Or Chaim kind of stuff, say that Tefillah. He's got a section called Mea Brochas, and then in that section he says the following. It's customary to say after Medrash Rabbi Shmuel to start off with Hoidu Lashem Kiru V'Shmoi. He quotes the Sefer HaEshkol, and the reason for saying Hoidu is because all the years that the Orim was still in a Yuriyo, which means under the drape in a tent. So do all of that time until it was brought into the Beis Hamikdash, Tikein David. That this chapter, this praise should be said. And he quotes from the Sefer Yochasin and Seder Olam, and the Tomid Shel Shachar, they were saying Hoidu, and in Tomid Shel Ben Arbaim, they were saying Shirul Hashem. So here, and since we've been saying Karbonas, therefore we should be saying this Mizmor. Now, what threw me is that may not be so well known, but the Orin and the Beis Beach were in totally different places. We had Mishkan was for 360 something years in Shiloh. Then it was in a town called Noiv, and then with the massacre over there, the whole story with Shaul HaMelech. Then the Oren was the Mizbeach was in Giv'on, in a town called Giv'on. It may not be far from Yerushalayim, but it's a different place, and that's quite clear historically that the Oren and the Mizbeach were at totally different locations. So here he's saying that it was with the Talmud. And there he's saying with the Oren. The Talmud is associated with Mizbeach. So we have here two, should we say, different sources. My reconciliation is, so I'm suggesting, that it was, you have the Mizbeach, and that's where the Karbonos are being brought. But then you have the Oren. The Oren is brought, and it shouldn't be neglected. It's there. It's such a central inyan. I mean, in the Beis Hamikdash, we've got two inyanim. We've got Avodas Odom, Avodas Karbonos. Now we've got the seat of the Shechina. The Oren is the seat of the Shechina, and the Mizbeach is the focus of Avodas Odom. These are two separate inyanim, which in the Beis Hamikdash are fairly close to one another. At that time, these were in two different places. Possibly, what the Orchos Chaim is saying, in Yerushalayim, in Ir David, at the time of the Korban Tomid, they said Hoidu Lashem Kiru V'Shmai, and in the afternoon they said Shirul Hashem, etc. So not to say that they said these Mizmorim at the Mizbeach where the Karbonos were being actually brought, but rather they were being said in Shalayim by the Oren, in Ir David, at the time when the Korban Tom was being brought. That's the best I could come up with to resolve that apparent discrepancy. And Yilorotzin Imrei Fi, and the Ikki is Hashem Suri V'Goyali. We should have a Geula Shleimo, the Mashiach Tzidkenu, especially in these Shiva Din Nechemta. We should see Nechomas Tzion V'Yerushalayim, with Mashiach Tzidkenu, Malkeinu V'Rishenu. Altiv.
Yashu Koyach. Good Shabbos.